What if the night Princess Diana died, a royal guard vanished without a trace? A man who wasn't listed on any manifest, who left no file, no forwarding address, just one silent gesture hours before the crash. Why was he seen behind the Ritz and then never seen again? Why did his locker remain untouched for years? And who sent his family a single unsigned envelope containing only his badge? What you're about to hear isn't in any official report, but it's something Guardsmen still whisper about today. Watch carefully, because once you see his posture in that grainy frame, you'll understand why some uniforms are never retired. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Before everything changed, before Paris, the tunnel, and the storm of unanswered questions, Sergeant Graham Whitcomb was just part of the routine. Part of the furniture, really. At Wellington Barracks, there are faces that come and go with each rotation, each new intake of lads just out of training. But Whitcomb? He'd been there longer than most of us had been alive. He wasn't loud, never barked like some of the older sergeants didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than most men's shouting. Tall, lean, always neat even when off duty. Wickham had that kind of posture that made you believe a man could stand still and still hold the line. He'd done ceremonial guard for decades. Buckingham Palace, Tower of London, Windsor Castle, you name it. But there were whispers too, that he'd done other work during the Troubles, that he'd spent time in Gibraltar, maybe even Berlin back when the wall still meant something. Nobody ever asked. You don't ask those kinds of things when the man you're asking could pin a room to stillness just by walking into it. I was 23 that year, still green enough to get nervous when a superior walked past, but old enough to start noticing when things didn't feel right. And something about Whitcomb's last few days did not feel right. It was August 27th, 4 days before the crash, when I saw him leave the barracks unusually early. Normally he was the last to leave, always double-checking locker locks, ticking off maintenance notes for the lads, polishing brass even when he wasn't on duty. But that morning, he was already dressed in civilian clothes, crisp, buttoned up, not a thread out of place. "Off somewhere, Sarge?" I asked casually. He looked at me, then down at the small leather case in his hand. It wasn't standard issue. "France," he said, "just for a bit." That was all. No briefing, no deployment sheet, no sign-out log. He wasn't even on leave. "You taking the Eurostar?" He gave me a faint smile. "Something like that." Then he clapped me on the shoulder, once firm, and walked out into the grey London morning. That was the last time I saw him. Back inside, I mentioned it to Corporal Harris, who kept most of the rotation schedules. "Whitcomb?" "Nah, he's not listed on anything," he said, without looking up from his clipboard. "Probably just a weekend off." But his boots were still there in the locker room that Sunday, and his pass card, and his journal, tucked under a clean spare pair of white gloves. He hadn't packed like a man going away. He'd left like someone who expected to come back. But he never did. 4 nights later, we'd all be gathered around a flickering television, watching grainy footage of a crashed black Mercedes in a Paris tunnel. And as the news scrolled across the bottom of the screen, Princess Diana dead at 36. A different kind of silence settled over Wellington Barracks. One by one, the lads started asking the same question. "Where's Sergeant Whitcomb?" He wasn't supposed to be there, not officially, not on paper, not according to anyone in authority when we asked later. But he was. The first to place him was a concierge at the Ritz Paris. A man named Michel Lafont, mid-50s, precise as a chessboard, still writes his logs in cursive. He didn't know Sergeant Whitcomb's name, but he remembered his presence. He wasn't a guest, not exactly, Michel told me years later, over coffee near Place Vendôme. But he walked like someone who didn't need permission. Michel described a tall British man in his 50s. Civilian clothing, pressed grey jacket, polished leather shoes, clean shave and a short cropped haircut you could time a clock to. He didn't linger in the lobby, never checked in. Always entered through the side staff entrance between 6 and 7 p.m, then waited quietly in the corridor behind the kitchens. He would ask for nothing, just stood near the service lift, hands clasped behind his back. Didn't talk, watched everything. At first, staff thought he might be hotel security, maybe even Interpol. But then someone caught him speaking fluent French with one of the pastry chefs about the Algerian elections. Another time, a bellhop swore he heard him answer a phone in Arabic. Always just a few words, never offering more than was asked. The Ritz was swarming with tension that week. Diana's presence had turned a 5-star hotel into a fortress of whispers. Photographers crouched behind flower pots, freelance bodyguards loitered near the lifts, and someone always seemed to be on the phone with London. Nobody had time to verify credentials. If a man looked like he belonged, people assumed he did. And Wickham looked like he belonged. The only time his presence was ever challenged was on the night of August 30th. A junior security man, young, over-eager, American accent, stopped him near the staff exit just before 10:45 p.m. "Sir, can I see your pass?" The man in the grey jacket turned slowly, met his eyes, and said in perfectly calm French, "I outrank you." That was it. The kid backed down, and 5 minutes later, that same corridor emptied as Diana, Dodi Al-Fayed and driver Henry Paul exited through the back to avoid the press. Security footage from the Ritz, what little was made public, confirms that someone was standing at that exit at 10:48 p.m, tall, still, motionless. Only a sliver of the man's back is visible as the camera pans past the kitchen door, but there's no mistaking the posture. We'd seen it too many times. Back straight, hands locked behind the back, feet at attention, the stance of a British Guardsman, even in civilian dress. That's the last trace of Sergeant Graham Whitcomb. He was not seen at the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. He was not listed on any passenger logs. And when French authorities reviewed hotel exit logs, the timestamp shows Diana's party left at exactly 10:55 p.m. But there's a gap. Between 10:48 and 10:54, the service hallway was unmonitored. No CCTV, no staff. No one reported seeing the man in grey again. It was as if he stepped into the shadows and never came back out. The Ritz's internal inquiry made no mention of him. The British Embassy denied assigning anyone to accompany Diana that night. And back in London, his locker at Wellington remained untouched. No resignation, no transfer, just one tall shadow. Gone. We were in the mess hall when the first bulletin came through. It was nearly 1 a.m, and the telly was low, just background noise. Most of us were still half-dressed from evening drill, boots off, shoulders aching, cracking jokes over leftover curry. Someone shouted for the remote when the words Princess Diana flashed across the bottom of the screen. Car crash in Paris. That sobered the room fast. The volume went up. Lads stood, one by one. No shouting now, no murmuring. Just rows of young men with clipped hair and red shoulders stiffening in disbelief. More updates, then speculation, then images, the mangled black Mercedes, the Alma tunnel, flooded with blue lights and camera flashes, reporters breathless, stumbling over words like critical condition and multiple injuries. At 4:06 a.m, the confirmation came. Diana, Princess of Wales, has died following injuries sustained in a car crash in Paris. Silence, the kind you feel in your lungs. No one moved. No one even pretended to have something to say. In the barracks of the Coldstream Guards, a stillness settled deeper than any we'd held on parade. It wasn't grief at first, it was confusion, disorientation, like the rules had just shifted beneath us. Then Corporal Harris asked it, "Where's Whitcomb?" I turned my head sharply, then looked around. His boots were still under the bench in the locker room. I'd seen them earlier that evening, and his dress jacket, pressed and hung on the same peg as always, hadn't moved. No one had seen him since Thursday. "Check the leave roster," someone murmured. "Already done. He wasn't listed. No leave, no training, no transfer, no notes at all. He was just missing." That morning, Sergeant Major Olcott called an informal roll. Not official, just a quiet check. When he reached Whitcomb's name, he didn't say it out loud, just paused, pen hovering, then moved to the next. We were dismissed early, told to prepare for the inevitable changes. Security would be doubled, schedules would shift. Rumours already swirled that the Queen was flying back from Balmoral. The nation would enter mourning, and we'd be among the first images shown to the public. Still, silent, composed. But behind our stillness, something was wrong. The crash was already being pulled apart in the press. Speed, paparazzi, a drunk driver. But none of it explained the unease hanging over our regiment. Because we knew someone who might have been there, and he wasn't answering his phone. His family hadn't heard from him. His last message to his sister, sent 2 days before, was oddly vague. "Tell Mum I'll be back next week. All quiet for now. Don't worry if you don't hear anything." That was it. No one ever heard from him again. Over the next few days, things grew stranger. Security at the barracks tightened, but no official inquiry was launched into his disappearance. Not publicly anyway, no posters, no military alerts. We were told he's on extended leave, but no one had signed off on it. And Guardsmen don't just walk away, not without ceremony, not without cause. Especially not men like Wickham. He'd served longer than some officers had been alive. He trained new lads like me with care, corrected our mistakes with calm, and once carried a new recruit 2 miles in pouring rain just to keep him from collapsing on first exercise. You don't forget men like that. And yet, by September 1st, it was like he'd never existed. His name was scrubbed from the mourning lists, his gear boxed quietly. And when Corporal Harris opened his locker to check for a mobile or address book, he found only one thing: a slip of paper tucked inside a spare glove with 5 words written in Whitcomb's even, clean hand. "Not all duty gets recorded." It's one thing when a man goes missing. It's another when no one seems willing to admit he was ever there. I tried at first, quietly, just asking around. A name here, a question there. Lieutenant Greaves said Wickham had transferred temporarily to Aldershot. But when I called a mate stationed there, he checked the records and laughed. "No Wickham here, mate. Closest we've got is a Weatherby who runs the canteen, and he's about 65. So I asked again, this time upstairs. Sergeant Major Olcott gave me a hard stare before muttering, "Some postings don't get filed through us. Let it be." Let it be? That wasn't like him. Olcott was the type who once chewed out a corporal for misplacing a napkin roster, but now he wouldn't even look me in the eye. That's when I started digging harder. I went to the barracks clerk. Jackson, new lad, jumpy, still too young to lie well. I asked him flat out if Whitcomb's file had been accessed or altered since August. He hesitated. Then he nodded once and whispered, "It's gone." "What do you mean gone?" "His folder, his disciplinary record, his assignments, his entire personnel jacket. Just gone, like it was never made." He glanced behind him like someone might be listening. "I asked the admin desk. They said he was probably a civilian contractor, not formal regiment. But that's bollocks. We all knew him." So I tried a different route. There's an old intelligence liaison, retired now, who comes to the pub near Vauxhall once a month for a pint and silence. We all called him the Listener. Half legend, half cautionary tale. They say he used to run Black Ops under Thatcher. Probably nonsense. But he knew things. I found him nursing a stout in the corner. Asked him plainly, "Did we have a man in Paris that week?" Royal Guard, quiet, mid-50s. Might have worked side detail for the princess. He didn't blink, just swirled his glass. Then he said, "Some details are buried because they need to be." "Doesn't mean they're gone," I asked again. "Was he one of ours?" The listener took a slow sip, then replied, "Not everyone who wears red wears it in public." And that was all. I later heard, through a friend of a friend, that a few journalists in Paris had tried to pull security footage from the Ritz's back exits. But the tapes for that night were incomplete. One camera, trained on the kitchen corridor, cut out between 10:48 and 11:03 p.m. Power surge, they said. Another camera, mounted on the service entrance by Place Vendôme, caught a shadow crossing diagonally through frame at 10:51 p.m. Blurred, out of focus, but the stride, the posture. I know what I saw. It was him. Then came the final nail, when an MP friend tried to submit a formal query to the Ministry of Defence for Graham Whitcomb's service history. The system returned a single line. Record does not exist. No classified. No redacted. Just erased. And in the army, erasure is never accidental. That's when we stopped asking. Because every door we knocked on after that led not to answers, but to silence. And deep down, some part of me already knew. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was a deletion. A year later, I took a train out to Wickham's hometown, a place called Lymington. Quiet, coastal, the kind of village where the roads are still lined with hedges instead of steel railings. I wasn't sent there. No orders. Just a need that wouldn't go away. I found his sister living in a weathered red brick cottage on the edge of a field. Her name was Margaret, mid-60s, white cardigan, the kind of woman who made tea before asking your name. I told her I served with her brother. She didn't cry. She just nodded slowly, then gestured toward a photo on the mantel. It was Graham, of course, younger, in his 20s, in full Coldstream dress. Bare skin on, eyes sharp, smile faint, but real. "He sent that just after Falklands," she said, handing me a biscuit. Said it was the proudest he'd ever looked in uniform. I asked if she'd heard from him after Paris. She looked down. "They told me he was never there." Her voice didn't shake, but her knuckles tightened around her teacup. "They said he wasn't on assignment, that maybe I was confused, but I'm not. I know my brother." I asked if anyone from the Ministry of Defence ever visited. Only once. Man in a grey suit, no insignia. Didn't give a name. Said Graham had been reassigned, possibly to a diplomatic unit, and might not be in contact for some time. She gave a bitter smile. That was in October of 97. He never came back. Then she stood and disappeared into the next room. When she returned, she was holding a plain brown envelope. No return address, no note. Just this, inside. She slid the contents into my hand. It was a Coldstream Guards badge, bronze, worn, the enamel slightly chipped on the right edge, exactly where Wickham used to run his thumb whenever he was thinking. I'd seen it 100 times. "This came through the letterbox in December," she said. "No knock, no sound. Just lying there on the doormat when I came back from the market." She paused. "He wouldn't have parted with this. Not unless—" Her voice trailed off. I looked at the badge in my palm. It was warm somehow. Heavy, like it carried more than just metal. "He used to say," she whispered, "that some men never stop standing guard, even when they're gone." We sat in silence for a long while. The tea went cold. The room dimmed as evening crept in. Before I left, I asked if there was anything else, any last message, anything he might have sent. Margaret shook her head. "Just a dream I keep having," she said. "I see him standing in the middle of the road outside my window. Same posture, same uniform, but every time I open the door to call him in, he's already turned around, walking away." I didn't know what to say, so I saluted him and left the badge exactly where I found it, resting on her mantel beside the photo of a man who never broke posture, even when the whole world forgot his name. 4 years passed. By then, the story of Diana's death had faded into history for most. Conspiracies still floated around the tabloids. Candlelit vigils came and went. But inside Wellington Barracks, things returned to routine. Shifts, drills, postings, names come, names go. But I never stopped thinking about Whitcomb. Then one afternoon in the spring of 2001, I was posted to St. James's Palace for a diplomatic reception. French delegation, formal, ceremonial, polished down to the buttons. It was the kind of event where everything moves on rails, every bow rehearsed, every step mapped. The only unscripted part is the smoking break. It always happens in the rear courtyard, out of sight of cameras, guards, translators, attachés, all clustered together, pretending to be casual. That's where it happened. An older man in a gendarmerie uniform stepped into the courtyard just as I lit a cigarette. He stood near me, nodded politely, and accepted my lighter. Merci. His English was good, not fluent, but sharp around the edges. Retired, judging by the medals on his chest. His posture was stiff but familiar, like someone who'd spent decades learning how not to flinch. After a few minutes of silence, he asked, "You served at Wellington?" "Yes." "Did you know a man named Whitcomb?" The cigarette froze halfway to my mouth. I didn't answer immediately. He turned to look at me directly. Tall, always straight. Cold eyes, hands behind his back, like a statue. I lowered my cigarette. "I did," I said quietly. He nodded slowly. So did I, briefly. I stared at him. "Where?" "Paris." He didn't smile, didn't blink. We were posted to opposite ends of the Ritz on the same night, August 30th. I never got his name, but he stood near the kitchens, watched every car, every door, said nothing. Then he looked away, as if remembering something that had been buried for years. "I didn't report what I saw," he continued. "Nobody did. There were too many cameras, too many press, too much confusion." "What did you see?" I asked. He exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. "After the princess's car left, I went to check the tunnel. It was procedure. We'd heard the crash on the radio. Everyone was rushing." He paused. "I was 5 minutes behind the convoy, maybe less. But as I entered the Pont de l'Alma on foot, I saw something strange." His voice dropped. "A British man, alone, walking away from the crash site, calm, not injured, dressed in grey, no badge, no weapon, just walking." I stared at him. "Could have been anyone." He shook his head. "It wasn't just anyone. He walked like a soldier, head up, shoulders back. Same man from the Ritz." "Are you sure?" "I remember how he stood, like granite. You don't forget a man like that." "What happened next?" "I followed, but he disappeared. Turned down a side corridor beneath the overpass. When I reached it, he was gone." "Gone where?" He looked at me. "You tell me." We finished our cigarettes in silence. Then he dropped his into a drain and turned to go. Just before he stepped back inside, he added, almost as an afterthought, "Sometimes the ones who disappear aren't lost. They're removed." I stood there long after he left. Removed, not lost, not missing. Removed. It sounded like something pulled from a chessboard. Quiet, efficient, final. That was the last time I heard anyone speak Whitcomb's name aloud outside the barracks. But the moment settled into me like a stone, because whatever he'd been doing that night, whatever post he'd been standing, it hadn't been random. And if he had disappeared, it wasn't because he ran. It was because he finished what he came to do. And someone decided that was enough. It's been nearly 3 decades now. Most of the lads who knew Whitcomb have moved on. Retired, relocated, reburied under different uniforms and jobs and lives. New faces stand at the gates now, younger, sharper. Cameras flash in their faces every hour. Most of the tourists never stop to wonder what those men are carrying beneath the red and black, but I still do. Sometimes I walk past the barracks and glance through the gates, and I still catch myself searching. Some foolish part of me, hoping to see that familiar stillness again, that quiet discipline, that posture you couldn't teach, only earn. They don't talk about him anymore, not officially. But when the new recruits whisper during downtime, when they swap ghost stories between drills, his name still comes up, never as a warning, always as a lesson. They call him the Silent Fifth, a shadow at post, a name without a file, a man who stood where no one asked him to stand and vanished before they could thank him. The legend shifts depending on who's telling it. Some say he was part of a private security wing. Others believe he was working intelligence under a false name. One version insists he was the only man who saw the car before it turned toward the tunnel and tried to stop it. But they all agree on one thing: he didn't run. He didn't abandon his post. Whatever happened that night in Paris, he faced it the same way he faced everything else. Head high, shoulders squared, never looking away. There's an old locker at the back of the Wellington Barracks. It's not used anymore. They've since repainted the walls, changed the flooring. But for some reason, that locker remains untouched. The number's been scratched off, the keys long gone, but everyone knows who it belonged to. Sergeant Graham Whitcomb. I opened it once years ago, just before transferring out. Inside, on the top shelf, was a folded towel and a pair of spotless white gloves, and taped to the inside of the door, written in faded blue pen, was a note. Only one line: "Some uniforms are worn once, others are worn forever." I closed the locker and never opened it again. Maybe one day they'll paint over it. Maybe one day no one will remember. But I hope they don't, because not all guards are posted for the ceremony. Some guard something far more fragile. The truth. Do you believe some truths are kept quiet, not to deceive us, but to protect us? What do you think really happened to Sergeant Whitcomb that night in Paris? And should some mysteries stay buried? Or should we keep asking? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one, and conversations like this are why we do what we do. If this story stayed with you, even for just a moment, go ahead and tap that like button. It helps more than you might think. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. We upload brand new Royal Guard stories every single day. And if you know someone who thinks these guards are just there for photos and parades, share this video with them. It might change the way they see tradition. There's another story waiting for you on screen right now. Click it next and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place, with a new moment that proves real duty doesn't always get recorded, but it never disappears.